We're here at EastSide Manor with Les Brown Jr. Les, what are you working on today?
We're doing a recording of Doris that was actually done in 1952, all mono, and it was done with a Page Cavanaugh trio. And Page Cavanaugh was a guy who used to work in bistros all around LA until he finally got his own place. And people would go in and just, it was the thing to do after you'd have dinner somewhere, and that's where you'd have your nightcap. And Doris used to love to go in and, sing songs with him. Because when she was with Warner Brothers, she was doing all those novelty tunes, Que sera, sera, whatever will be. So this is all standards and things like that, songs that she really loved and had fun with. Incredible vocals and incredibly intimate. And Tom Gramuglia, who has a label that owned the masters to these and got permission from Doris to be able to release these. So he called me up and he said, what would you think? Let's do a project where we open it up to stereo and bring in orchestrations and all that. And I said, that'd be great. And then Tom mentioned John Forbes to me, who I didn't know at the time, but we got on the phone together and we talked for maybe half an hour, 45 minutes. And in the first 15 minutes, I get it. This guy gets it. He understands me. We're okay. And so we did actually the first part of this via, computers, telephone calls, emails, and things like it. He'd send me ideas that he was working on and, play it on a keyboard, and I'd listen and I'd go, yeah, that's good. Let's try this and that. And then when it came down to really starting to do some of it, he said, the only thing we don't have is drums. And I said, well, I used to be a drummer, but it's been a while since I played. And he said, do you think you could do it just all brushes on a snare? I said, well, what's the worst can happen? We did 15 drum tracks in one day. I have not recovered. Rusty, but they all worked out real well. It's really an interesting and exciting project. I mean, when you hear what a great singer she was. And of course, I have a long history with Doris.
And that's what I'd really like to dive into with you. I think everyone would really like to hear how deep this history with Doris Day really goes.
Well, I charge more for that. It's easy. Well, it's not just Doris. I may have been a producer a long time, but how do I know so much about it? Well, she was the singer with my dad's band back in the 40s, and I was a baby, all right? And she had a son, Terry Melcher, who became a producer too, used to work with the Beach Boys and Linda Ronstadt and people like that. And in those days, the band would be working theaters. So what they do is show a movie. After the movie, the band would rise up, on a riser, and they do a little show, live show. Clear the house, and they do it again. Well, she had terrible stage fright, believe it or not. She didn't like to perform live so much. She didn't mind doing it when they were playing for dancing, but it terrified her, to do a live theatrical type where people were just looking at her. Movies she didn't mind, of course, and recording because you could stop and do retakes, which she really didn't have to do. But anyway, so she'd go out and do her part of the show, and then she'd come backstage, and Terry and I'd be there, so I used to say she was my babysitter. Well, later on, my dad started playing. He had a guy who was his historian who kept all the records and stuff, and air checks. Whenever bands would be on the air, which they were all the time, they were remote broadcasts from ballrooms and hotel ballrooms and stuff like that. He had all the transcriptions of that, and he put them on cassette, and he sent them to my dad, and my dad had called me up and said, come and listen to these. This is before, I was just a baby, 5, 6 years old, and listening to Doris sing, how great she was, and then realizing that after she became a movie star, they wanted her to do those novelty tunes and things like that. Man, with the band, she was such a great singer. And this is very much like that. Now, through the years, needless to say, I never got a chance to work with her because I went into rock and roll and, other type productions. And I'm a television and movie producer too. Now I have my chance after all those years. And of course, unfortunately, we lost her just recently. And this is in tribute to Doris.
And it's hard to lose such an iconic, multifaceted star like Doris Day. It is great for the fans to get another bit of fresh music from her, though. That has to be really special for the fans.
Doris was the #1 box office star for many years, bigger than the men, and very often, people see what they think those people are. She was very down to earth, a lot of fun. In fact, when she was with the band, her nickname was Dodo. All right. And she loved to be called Dodo. And she was the champion poker player in the band, too. She used to take all the guys' hard-earned money, when they'd play poker on the bus. But, she was an incredible woman. Yeah, very strong, too.
And being that she was an artist that suffered from stage fright and also had a lot of demands on her during her career, I think it really comes across how authentic and intimate the recordings really are.
Yeah, it's true, and because there was no pressure on her with these recordings, they weren't designed to be hit records necessarily. They were just to have fun and to sing what she wanted to and do it relaxed and no pressure. When you go in the studio for the label or for Warner Brothers Pictures, that's real business and that's pressure. This is the no pressure side, and you can hear it. It just comes right out at you, and it's so intimate. I know a couple of people have come in while we're doing it, and they've listened and said, "Man, it's like she's singing right into your ear." I go, "Yeah, it's great."
Yeah. And Doris Day was known as a very compassionate person outside of her role as a starlet, and also an animal rights activist of some renown. Did you get to witness any of that?
No. I mean, for the most part, during those days, they were traveling all the time. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty hard to keep a pet in hotels and on the bus. Some allowed, not very many allowed in those days. So I think that was something she probably always had the love of them, but to be able to exercise some form of love for them came later. And she's totally devoted to that. She was, her foundation. Her love of animals has spread far beyond dogs now, too. Mm-hmm. It's all animals that she can rescue. Horses, of course, and things like that. It's a real animal rescue facility that she's put together, the foundation for that. And she stopped traveling, and I mean stopped completely, because she didn't like to leave her animals. And I understand that. Mm-hmm. I go through withdrawals when I leave home and I miss my animals. I have one little dog, her name is Bella, and she's my relaxing thing, and if I'm working at home in the office and I get a little tense and stuff, she comes over about 5 o'clock every day and she'll just look and go, "Okay." And she gets right up here on my lap and I just go, "Oh yeah, thank you, Bella." They're magic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And your father, Les Brown, famous for Les Brown and the Band of Renown, is also the songwriter of Doris Day's, I guess, breakthrough hit, Sentimental Journey. I'd love if you give us a little more history about your dad and how that all worked out.
Well, Dad, became a band leader almost by accident. All right. It was during the Depression. And he was actually studying to be a linguist, language professor, so he could get tenure at a college and never have to worry about having a job, all right? But he had his musical education before he went to college. So when he got to Duke University, he was in the band playing alto. In fact, that band had seen him playing someplace and they got him a free ride to the university. And so the first year, the band was led by a football hero on the team who could sing pretty well. And Dad said he was a nice guy, but he didn't know anything about music. Then he graduated. So the band elected my dad band leader. And as such, they play at the student union and do all that stuff every day at 5 o'clock. And then on weekends, they'd be hired by various roadhouses outside of town. And they'd play out there for dancing. Well, one night during their senior year, Eli Oberstein, who was the head of Bluebird Records, had been vacationing in North Carolina. And he was driving back to New York, and he passed the roadhouse, and he saw all these cars. And he said, I wonder what's going on in there. So he went in, and he listened to the band, and he liked it so much, he came up to my dad, and he said, if you guys want to come to New York, I'm offering you a recording contract right now. Now, keep in mind, they hadn't graduated yet. So Dad said, well, look, I'm going to have to talk to the guys and see if we can keep this together. So, of course, he went to the guys and said, guys, if we go to New York right now, we can have a recording contract. And they say, when do we leave? Much to the chagrin of their parents, of course, all right? So they go to New York and they started recording. And that was his start as a band leader, okay? Eventually, some of the parents insisted the guys go back. But he kept at it, and he was now living in New York. And he needed a girl singer, and he heard that Doris Day was singing with Bob Crosby's band, Bob Crosby and the Bobcats. But she wasn't very happy there, even though Bob was a very nice guy and had a good band. But all the guys in the band were hitting on her all the time. And, she didn't like that, all right? So my dad went to see her, heard her sing, went backstage and offered her the job. And he said, I know why you're unhappy here. She said, yeah. And he says, that will never happen with my band. All right, I don't allow that kind of stuff. She said, deal. And that's how they got together. So I think she was about 17 or 18 years old, just a mere teenager at the time. And she then married a trombone player from another band. And he was a piece of work, man. He was very abusive, beat her, terrible. But she had Terry, the son, with him. So she left the band, of course, to have Terry. And in the meantime, my dad and Ben Homer, who was the chief arranger, and a lyricist named Bud Green, they wrote Sentimental Journey. So Dad said, this is a song that should be for Doris. I got to get her back. So he got in touch with her and said, come on back and join the band. She says, I can't. I've got a baby. I've got a boy. He said, look, bring your mother or whomever you want, and we'll pay for it all. We'll take it. He'll be with you the whole time, wherever we go. She said, okay, you got a deal. So I'm trying to remember, they actually recorded, or they couldn't record the song. It was written in 1943. But there was a strike called by the head of the musicians union trying to get more money, of course, for recording musicians. That strike lasted almost 2 years. So finally, near the end of 1944, they went in and recorded Sentimental Journey for Columbia Records. Bing, we now go over to 1945, and the war comes to an end, and they release the song, boom, going to take a Sentimental Journey home. It was a #1 record for 18 weeks and certainly changed their lives, my dad and Doris. So now traveling around, they were drawing huge crowds. And it got to where they went to the Palladium in California, which was a huge ballroom. And my dad worked there 6 days a week, and you'd get anywhere between 6,000 and 7,000 people a night to come in and see the band. And they'd dance, Well, the movie people came in too, and they saw Doris Day, and Warner Brothers offered her a screen test. So she came to my dad, and she said, Les, Warner Brothers has offered me a screen test, but, I'm under... She said, go, do it, see what's up. So she had the test, and they offered her a contract, and Dad let her out of the contract with him. And the rest, of course, is history. And they remain lifelong friends, So that is how they got together. And she said to this day, or recently until she passed, that the most fun she ever had was traveling around with the band and those guys. And she made lifelong friends from that experience.
Les, with the new project, is there anything that's standing out, like a favorite so far?
That's a tough one. And of course, it's very subjective, you know. I mean, my favorite cut doesn't mean it's going to be somebody else's. Probably out of this collection, there's a song called Embraceable You that she does so well. And the other one is an old Rodgers and Hart tune called I Could Write a Book. I mean, she just nailed it. And you hear it, and it just draws you right into it, and you're like, oh, man, you know, incredible stuff. And, of course, having never worked with her, as a producer, generally, my job as a producer, when I'm working with an artist that hasn't been assigned to me, that I've gone out and, put together so we could do things, I always let them make the final choice. It's their record. It's not mine. My job is to give them the best I can do to make them sound the best and do all that. And it's difficult this time when she can't respond. So, I'm relying on my experience of hearing her sing so much over the years and all that. But, there's special memories I have. I know at one point I lived out in Malibu and she had a place out there. And I went into a store or a market or something, and she was there. And I said, Doris, hi, it's Butch Brown. My dad called me. They knew me as Butch. She went, oh, my gosh, and it was just magic. The way she remembered me when I was just a baby and then growing,
Yeah.
And then later, we went up to Carmel. She asked us to come up there for the charity and perform. She wouldn't sing, she wouldn't perform, but, we re-met and talked and had a great reunion and did that with the band and my dad. And it was just, she had a television show at one point too, that was not the Doris Day series, but it was just a show about animals and stuff. But she wanted to bring the band up there to kind of do a reunion. And so she did. She brought as many of the original members that they had, this is a number of years ago, and put it together. And she actually did do Sentimental Journey with them. And that was very, very special.
So just an unexpected...
Well, she almost did it like, it was kind of casual and they were there. And she talked, about it and talked to my dad about it and all. Yeah, it was a very special show. Well, for me anyway.
A lot is known, a lot's written about Doris Day's career, about her music. If you could, give us a little insight. What was Doris Day like outside of that role of being a star? Like, did she have close friends, close with family?
To try and put that in a perspective, when you become as big a star as Doris became, it's a tremendous amount of responsibility and it's a tremendous pressure. And as a result, you don't have a lot of time for a lot of friends. She and my dad always were very close, but that doesn't mean that they saw each other every day or every month or every week. But they'd speak on the phone. Rock Hudson was one of her favorite people. She loved him, loved working with him. But most of it was, social. And in those days when it was social, it was really designed around her work. Because wherever she'd go, the paparazzi, and they weren't called that then, with the movie magazines, they followed. They were always there. So she had to be Doris, and it's difficult. So most of the time it was, very quiet and stay at home and, be with Terry, her son, who eventually, of course, moved out and everything, but they were very close. And again, she was married to her manager, if you will, Marty. She wasn't a real good picker of men. As I say, the first husband was very abusive to her. Second husband was a very nice guy, but in those days, it was hard for men to deal with a woman who was becoming more powerful than they were, all right? And the reason I'm sure Doris said that the best time she ever had was traveling with the band is because she wasn't under any pressure. You know, it was just, there she was to be able to sing and do that, and she wasn't responsible for being the hit or doing all that. It's hard, you know, it's very difficult. You see a lot of stars go through that same thing. So that's about all I can tell you about that. She wasn't terribly gregarious, let's put it that way.
So most people don't know that Doris Day is a stage name. Do you know the story behind her getting the moniker Doris Day?
As I know it, you know, when she was in Cincinnati, now Doris, believe it or not, started out as a dancer, and apparently a very good dancer. She got in an automobile accident and had a terrible leg injury, and she was took her about 2 years almost to recover, and ended her dancing career for all intents and purposes, you know. I'm glad it did. I don't know if she's glad, but, you know, it turned her into this great singer. Who knew? But she had a spot that they hired her for on the local radio station in Cincinnati. And again, she was just a teenager. And Doris Keppelhoff was, you know, somebody there said, no, we can't use that. It's too long, you know. I don't know if it was one of those people that gave her the name or if she chose it. I would believe that probably somebody there said, we'll call you Doris Day.
So something said spur of the moment can end up really becoming iconic.
Yeah. There's a lot of things like that happen. This has nothing to do with Doris, but I'll tell you 2 stories, all right? My dad was known as Les Brown of the Band of Renown. Well, before he became that, he was still a band leader and doing very well. But they were doing a remote broadcast one night from who knows where. And the theme song, which they always started with, was played by a trombone player. And the trombone player had gone in on the break before the broadcast to get a drink and found a rather attractive lady there. And he was working on that. And he was late. So there they were, the band was ready to go, and he couldn't start. And so my dad said to my uncle, who was also in the band, would you go find him and get him back here? And he said to the announcer, this was the, stretch. So the announcer saying there, well, here we are, ladies and gentlemen, atop the sky roof at the so-and-so hotel. Are you having a wonderful time? Yay, like that. Well, we hope you're enjoying everything. Now, the trombone player gets in place and picks up his horn, and the announcer says, and now it's time for Les Brown and his Band of Renown. And they play the theme. So after the radio show, my dad said, that's pretty cool. Do you mind if I use that? And he says, no, go ahead. So that's how he did that. Another story was Dad working with Bob Hope. This again is I'll tell you a couple of stories, all right? Okay, so the band is working with Bob Hope. And they were in New York at the Paramount Theater. And in those days, Bob, who was doing movies, would do a floor show between every showing of the movie. And of course, Jane Russell was in the movie too. Now, while the movie was playing, they'd have a couple hours to go hang out someplace or do whatever. So Pearl Bailey was in town, and they were friends with Pearl, my dad, and Bob Hope. So they went over to see Pearl Bailey, and she had an opening act. His name was Joe Barry. And Bob liked him so much, he went to Pearlie Mae and he said, hey, Pearl, do you mind if I take this kid back to me with me to the Paramount Theater? And I'm going to give him a break and put him on the show. She said, oh, that's great, man. So they go back to the theater and the guy says, well, I don't have any arrangements or what do I? He said, don't worry, Les will work it out with you. So they got together with my dad and they found a couple of arrangements there and they put it together because Dad had men singers too, guys. So they're about to go on, and Bob looks at this guy, and he says, hey, is that your real name, Joe Barry? And he says, no, Mr. Hope, it's not. And he says, well, what's your real name? He says, Anthony Benedetto. He says, Anthony, no, that's too long. I'll tell you what, from now on, you're Tony Bennett. And he went out and introduced him. And the audience loved him, and he stayed on the show forever. And that's exact. And the band was the first band he had ever sung with, big band, you know? Now, I'll go back to Doris Day, okay? My dad worked with Bob Hope for 52 years. He was his band leader. Did all the television shows, all the radio shows, all the trips to all over the world, entertaining servicemen and doing all that. Well, going back to the Hollywood Palladium, when the band was playing there the first time, his agent came in to see the band. And after the set, one of the sets, he went back, introduced himself to my dad. His name was Jim Saphir. And he said, gee, the band is wonderful. You know, this is great. I really love the band. And my dad said, well, is Bob looking for a band leader by any chance? He says, well, as a matter of fact, we are, but we can't afford you. I mean, look at the crowds you're drawing. You're one of the biggest 3 bands in the country right now. Dad said, well, you know, I've got a couple of kids that are about ready to start school, and I don't want to be on the road for the rest of my life. So would you ask Bob if he'd consider me to be his band leader? Are you sure? He says, yeah, I'll ask him. So he goes to Bob, and he says, Bob, you know, we're looking for a band leader. He says, what do you think about Les Brown? He says, Les Brown? Who's Les Brown? He says, well, I'll tell you what, I'll play you a record. And he puts on Sentimental Journey. And Bob listens to it, and he goes, wow, who's that girl singer? And he says, well, her name's Doris Day, and she sings with Les. Well, get her. And he said, Bob, she's under contract to Les Brown. He says, okay, get Les Brown. 52 years they were together. And Doris was with him for a year.
And Les, with your lifelong history with Doris Day, without putting words in her mouth, do you think she would be proud of this project and proud to let her listeners have it finally?
Absolutely, because, you know, she allowed Tom Gramuglia to have the masters. All right. And it wasn't like he paid a lot of money for it or anything. And that was through an association with her publicist. His name was Bobby Weiss. All right. And so she certainly wanted it to be out there. And this is after she was no longer under contract to any of the labels or anything, you know. When you listen to it and you play it for younger artists, you know, today, a bunch of young women came in. They're singers, just to listen for a few minutes at the behest of Tom. And they listened to that, and wow, what a great singer. Yeah, and there's no tuning. There's no overdubs. All the recording that she did was live. The orchestra was right there, she was right there, and they recorded it right there. Now, they might do 2 takes or 3 takes, but it's not like they overdub anything or, you know. So they were mixed on the spot. Everything was done like that. There's an energy that comes over those kind of records. You hear it in Frank Sinatra, you hear it in Dean Martin, you hear it in the early, well, Tony Bennett still records that way. Because it's, like Sinatra used to say, he'd walk in the studio and say, okay, guys, you got 3 takes to get this. After that, I'm just manufacturing it. So if you want the real deal, you got to get it in the first 3 takes. And that's kind of what you have here. I don't think they repeated it at all. They just went in and did one song after another. But the energy and the, how can I say it, the truth that comes across from that is wonderful, you know. So it's comfortable, it's real, and it creates a whole different energy, and it's imperfect in its perfection.
Given that the original recording was made in 1952, that would be then the trio and Doris are in a room together recording onto one mic. Do you think that style of recording kind of gives it a special type of chemistry, a special energy?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The sound, too. I mean, in the mixing process, which we're in right now, there's very little we have to do to her voice. It was recorded so well, and it's so intimate. She's right on top of it, you know, and you just feel that come across. And all we're doing is just laying a little different groundwork because people are so tuned to listening in stereo and things like that right now. So we're filling out that. We're not getting in the way of what they did. We're just kind of enhancing it. It doesn't need improving. All right. We're trying to stay as true as we can to what the original was.
Les, thank you so much for sitting down with us and sharing some stories. We sure appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks very much for asking.